All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Train the Trainer podcast. It's been a little while now. Here we are looking ahead at 2024. I'm excited to get back into this. Our big focal point this year, and where we're going to kick off today, is more game planning. How do we go about setting ourselves up for success? So, one of the initiatives that we have across our company, across all of our clubs, is a minimum growth standard of at least $100,000 a year. Right. So, we have an initiative that we're calling the Six Figure Growth Plan, and we're going to talk about some best practices that we've seen that we'd love to share across the board that both result in a minimum of six-figure growth. So that six-figure growth plan, and additionally, the leader, right, or head trainer, the trainers in the building, aspiring and pushing well beyond that six-figure mark. So we have a couple different avenues and routes that our leaders go about achieving that, and we're going to share from some different personal experience. We're going to share some stories of some other individuals that have found success. So Tiger, I'm going to kick it off with you. So leading a club that grows in multiples of six figures a year, each and every year. Um, how do you go about structuring your day to achieve that each year? How do you position yourself to win as an individual that still keeps a high training load?
So it's a little bit different on my end due to how many training sessions I still do on a weekly basis. So I don't necessarily have like a lot of gaps throughout the day. So what I have is more of like a weekly non-negotiables, and that kind of depends on where I'm at in the month. But I think the biggest thing is like having those non-negotiables as like part of your schedule, where it's like I know that I have to get X, Y, and Z done. So like I know the first week of every single month I'm going to go over client retention. So whether that's my own retention for my own clients, or if it's managing some of my guys and checking what their client retention is, anybody that's not like an active client with us that was last month, we're going to review where they went, what's going on, and we're going to see if we can save that person. Candidly, that's something I need to do even more often. I think I should be doing that bi-weekly. I think another non-negotiable I have is every month in the beginning, at least, we're going to start assigning goals for that month, rather than us having our goal of like, hey, in a year I want you to grow $100,000. It's like that's great, but that means every month you need to grow about 8,000, and that's a little bit more front of your face of like, oh goodness, I need to do 8,000 right now. I think when it's 100,000 and it's a year away, it's like, well, I can just wait, and then you get 6 months into the year and you realize you haven't done anything. So you set up your goals a little bit shorter, and so every single month we're reassigning our goals and making sure that we're in alignment. So if you've had a bad month last month, that means your activity, so how often or how much are you engaging with leads and prospects, needs to be much higher this month to make up for last month. Because you don't want to have 2 months where you go backwards, because now you're way behind on that annual goal that you had. At the end of each month, usually reviewing all of our renewals. So we're checking which clients that are due for renewal on training packages are like already have bought them, and which ones are we still waiting on. And if we're waiting on them, that tells us a lot too. If they're projected to need to renew on a day and they're 2 or 3 weeks behind that renewal, that means our training frequency is a problem in our club or as an individual. So if I've agreed to train with this person 1 day a week and they only had 4 sessions on their account, just to make the math easy, then I know at the end of the month they have to renew. If they're not ready to renew and they still have a session on their account, that means we missed a week of training, right? That's going to put them behind on results, but it also puts you behind on getting your renewal back in. So now your paychecks are going to be behind, your total revenue is going to be behind. And as your business grows, I mean, we're talking about $100,000 in growth, that only gets significantly worse, because now you're dealing with, when you have 40 people, if 10% are behind, that's 4 people. But if you have 4 people and 10% behind, you're looking at maybe one person being behind, and that's a lot easier. So it gets harder as you grow. So you have to have even better systems in place.
For sure, and I 100% agree. If you start with a mission, let's say, of an annual goal, how you end up getting there is how you break it down into. You mentioned your weekly themes, your
Mm-hmm.
weekly non-negotiables that you go out achieving. Do you communicate that to your team, or is this more of just a focal item for you of like tasks that you want to complete each week throughout the month?
I've done both. I found, I think, more success being transparent with what my goals are for the club. Sharing that with my team, I think, has helped a lot with creating some buy-in on their end. Before, it was a lot of me doing it myself, and that worked great too, because you can align it a little bit more with that personal trainer's individual goals. But as the team's grown, the culture's grown, I've been able to kind of present them to the team and say, hey, this is our team goal. And then on an individual level, when I'm texting people every day, I talk to them about where their individual part is on that team goal. I think that's given me better tie-in, and I think my trainers trust me a little bit more, versus if they feel like I'm like holding things back from them and I'm just pushing them on like a singular metric over and over again. If it doesn't feel like their goal, they feel like it's my goal, and that never works out. So if I make it
Right.
our goal, then it goes a little bit better.
It's not like some secret initiative that only you get to work on and not the
Yeah.
team.
And then I think when it's like a secret thing for just yourself, then that means it's probably lining your pocketbook.
Right.
And it's a weird thing I think sometimes trainers go through, because the thing, like as a leader in our industry or in my club, like the things that make me successful are making them successful. But trainers love to detach those and think that somehow it's possible for me to be successful without them being successful. And that's not real. But trainers don't always know that right away. And so you kind of have to tailor it over to them and make sure that they still feel like a priority and they feel important, which they are, obviously. Otherwise, I lose.
Yeah, we can't go about training more people without.
Yeah, and if we lose, then the whole community loses. So
100%. So you mentioned within that week, you break that down into like your daily interactions with individuals. You mentioned like my text that I sent out to my team. What do those daily interactions look like? And do they vary greatly day to day, or do you have a cadence that you use throughout your week, or how do you structure that?
I think your daily interaction with your team should be very similar to what you're probably doing as a trainer when it comes to if you were going to grow your business, right? Mm-hmm. Is daily as a trainer, you need to be pushing engagement. So you need to be getting new people to come see you, talking to new people. Like that needs to be daily. And you need to be talking to your own clients. So as a leader, it's the same thing. You need to talk to your trainers daily on like their own personal stuff. But at the same time, you need to talk to them daily and make sure you're holding them accountable to pushing that engagement. I think when you have your weekly themes, I'm not daily texting my trainers about like renewals or daily texting them about retention issues. I'm going to do those maybe at the beginning of a week or the beginning of a month or the end of a month. But the daily interaction is almost always about engagement. So it could be just reminding them to do engagement. So like, hey, you need to make contacts today, and hopefully you're tracking that on some sort of CRM. And so you're seeing that they haven't done that. It could be interacting with whoever they had in assessment the last day. Hey, how did that assessment go? Hey, how did that lead go that I sent you? If I sent you a contact that I wanted you to reach out to, when are they scheduled for? Making sure that all of those things are tied up and nice and tidy, but you're always driving engagement. All of those would fall under engagement. I guess somewhat conversion too, but I'm not having a daily sit down conversation with how we're doing our assessment process.
You're not having that skill-based conversation.
It's not a skill conversation on those daily interactions. It's just the accountability on the engagement. Just like when you're talking to your clients daily, if you're a trainer, you're not texting them every day about their squat form being perfect. You're making sure they worked out. That's the base, right? Mm-hmm. We work on your squat form when we set up time to meet for an hour. That's when we can work on skill issues. But outside of that, it's just the frequency and the interaction.
Okay. How, and if you have a trainer on staff, I mean, do you reach out to them each day then?
Yeah, the goal would be to contact every trainer every day. That doesn't always happen. I'm certainly not perfect, but
I think the degree to which you do that and your consistency is how quickly you can move the needle. We use that analogy all the time. It's like turning a cruise ship to change behavior, and each interaction adjusts that trajectory just a millimeter each time. So the more often you have those interactions, the more consistent you are. One, the more likely they are to believe that you're mission driven and out to help them as opposed to help yourself. But the more likely that both of you are towards achieving that greater outcome.
I think if you need, like, let's say you need 50 touch points to get a trainer to be relatively autonomous and do these things on their own, I'd rather have those 50 touch points be more in like a month or a month and a half than it be spanned out across a year before they really start growing. Especially because that's when it's spanned out across a year, their success is so slow that buy-in's not there. But if you can make them successful in 6 weeks because you got those 50 touch points done in 6 weeks, now you're going to get all that buy-in back in.
Love that. It's just, you have a set amount of work requirement that it takes to achieve X target. The faster that you can condense and bring that down, the more likely they are to carry those behaviors on moving forward.
Yeah.
We use that analogy as well. It's like if you have a dog that has an accident on the ground and you wait to scold that dog a week later, the dog has no idea why you're upset about it. It's an hour, right?
Yeah.
Like if it's any longer than an hour, the dog's gonna have no idea why you're yelling at the dog. You're just yelling at the dog.
I think it's like it's like 30 seconds.
It's a short period of time. But oftentimes I feel like sometimes leadership with trainers, this is probably across all industries, but you're going to give your trainers an initiative for the week. Let's say it's X number of contacts, X number of presentations, etc. and then there isn't that daily interaction on how they went and how we can course correct and how we can do better. So they may have a week full of failures before any kind of course correction, and that damage can be compounding. Right? They're going to more likely believe their experiences than they are to believe your words, right, or your coaching.
Yeah, I think the consistency part's huge too. Even if the interaction's not every single day, I think if you have it, like my trainers know the first week of every month, they're going to get their graphs back because I update their like graph on how they're doing. So they're going to get that on the first week of every month, and they're going to get retention texts. So just that being consistent, it's not as frequent as I think it should be, but the consistency I think is maybe what comes first or matters most when it comes to intentions. Because I think if you're just doing it randomly, then it's like I think one, you look unorganized and you look unprofessional to your team, but then on top of that, it seems like you're only doing it when you need something. Mm-hmm. But the consistency, I think, is certainly the best part, and having that defined expectation for them so they know it's coming is huge.
So, what other fundamental items? You mentioned a lot of like the short interaction points with your trainers, just on following up on their goals and the things that are going to move your club forward. But what other fundamentals do you believe that a leader looking to grow their program by at least six figures while positioning themselves to earn six figures as well? What other fundamentals do you think they have to have, like within their week? You had mentioned like updating their staff on where they stand. What other fundamentals?
I think updating yourself on where you stand as a whole, like in the club. So checking the scoreboard, if you will. And I don't mean like checking dollars in the drawer, because I think that's like we talk about lagging indicators. I think dollars in the drawer is one of those things where, like, if we have a huge renew month, I know it's the work that was done a month ago that gave us that. It's not that month. And so what I'm usually watching is, I mean, we talk about engagement, conversion, and service all the time. So we're talking about contacts. We're talking about conversion. So, I mean, the percentage of people you sign up when you do a consultation. And then we're talking about service. We're talking about retention and renewals, right? I think you should have standards for where those should be, right? At our club, I think our standard is like anything below 50% on our conversion, we consider bad. So if I notice that as a club across a week, our conversion is below 50%, then I know that that's what I need to go touch on immediately. Like the next chance I get to interact with all the trainers or whichever trainers saw the most consultations over the course of that week, we're going to go ahead and touch on conversion and make sure the skill is fixed, right? If we see that the engagement's low, then we're going to talk about engagement more often, right? So I think just analyzing the scoreboard, because it's really simple. It's just numbers. You don't have to make it like a personal thing on, well, this person had, they got sick and then they were on vacation and this was going on. None of that matters. Just the numbers are the numbers. So if I see that a number's down below my standard, then I know that's what I have to police and that's what I have to go ahead and educate on that next week.
I think that's so important. You mentioned it takes what it takes, right? So if you have the goal of X amount of growth, right? Let's use the $100,000 number, right? It always just comes down to how many contacts you need. Mm-hmm. Of those, how many you can get to show up to an appointment, how many of those you can team up as a client, and how long and how often, your lifetime value of your customer once they're in your program. How as a fitness manager that did not carry the same amount of training load that you do, how I would structure my day is outside of the appointments that I had preset. So whether that be a training session, whether that be a weekly reoccurring meeting or webinar, something along those lines, or a assessment, right? I saw the remaining hours in my days as breaks, right? And how I won my day was going to be how I ran through those breaks. And for me, I structured those the same each day, so a little bit different. And then the weekly themes were still there. I had things that I would want to accomplish each week. But I looked at it very similar to what you described, where if, let's say, lead generation, where we're looking to have 200 leads structured for the week, right? Or on a trailing 7-day average. If we were below that, that was going to be my first break, where I took an hour where I focused on lead generation, both for myself and for my team. Second was conversion, like you mentioned, depending on where we were converting, whether it was under 50%, we would just look at closing skills, we look at objection overcomes, we dive into like the intake forms to see what we're missing. And I would try to sharpen that axe with whoever on the team was struggling the most. So who on the team is below 50%, they're going to come do role play with me that day. Third, because trainers love that, is just spend an hour talking shop with somebody, and that might be over lunch or inviting a trainer into my workout. So those were my first 3 breaks. 4 was going to be whichever area was weakest. So of those three, which was weakest, and then I'd go back to that again. So if I had more than 4 hours of my day unaccounted for walking in, the remaining hours was just going to be on that weak point until it got fixed. Which, for the most part, if you have all your other KPIs in line, then it's just going to be lead gen.
So just like recapping it in my own head because I want to understand this better. So like you'd have an appointment. Let's say you have a training session at 5, training session at 6. Your first break's at 7 a.m. Okay, so that first break you put in your schedule for that hour, you would put in engagement, and then you'd go review. And then same thing throughout the rest of the day. So you had an 8, 9, a 10 maybe, and then 11 at second break. So now we're going to focus on conversion. And I remember you'd reach out to some of us and you'd be like, hey, I'm available at 11. Who's going to come meet with me in my office to go over this?
Yep.
I remember seeing those texts a lot. I didn't go in there a lot.
I don't know, and I don't know if that's how I structured my day, right? Because there's just each of those things every single day. But that's how I've always structured it, and I've shared that probably multiple times before at this point. But that's how I would go structure my day. So it wasn't like decision fatigue. It wasn't like, oh, I just finished this appointment. Now what? I sit down at the computer and then I just go through random reports for an hour, right?
Yeah.
I didn't move the needle on the things that I know are most important. Now, I had some other rules in there too, like you use the example of like 7 a.m. being a first break. If my first break was before 9, then it was going to be workout. And ideally, you'd work out with a member of your team too, because then you're doubling on that service piece. And you might pick somebody that doesn't deliver great sessions or great workouts. Right?
Yeah.
Cool. You're going to now either train me or we're going to train together, and kill two birds with one stone.
I think it's a great way to foster culture too. Whenever you're making those decisions on who you're going to spend that extra little bit of time with too, because you can take one of your guys who's maybe a little bit on the outside in terms of just the activity piece. So like if you notice somebody's activity is low, sometimes just spending, like people love quality time. It's like a love language, isn't it? So you just do quality time with them and suddenly everything bumps up a ton. So I think that's definitely a big one. I think that's one thing that I've been like super happy with this year. I think is spending the additional time with my training staff. And it's not always outside of work. A lot of times we're talking about work because that's what we do together.
For sure.
But spending that quality time that's not considered work is huge, especially if you're going to grow, a big staff.
That alone, though, doesn't move the needle. So I'm not disagreeing with you at all.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times leaders mistake that as like I'm spending time with my trainers or I'm developing them. And mostly it's just
talking,
shooting the crap.
Like half the time it's bragging on themselves.
Right, where it isn't. Or it might be education without checking for understanding, right? Where if you go through a sales conversation, cool, you're going to take me back through that, right? Or if I'm going to take you through a workout, cool, you're going to take me back through. You're going to take me back through a workout, where you're checking for understanding there. Anything else that you believe is super important for someone that's trying to position themselves for growth moving forward in the next year, as far as how they structure their day, how they prioritize the things that they need to get done in a week, a month, etc., that can best position them to be successful?
I mean, I think being accountable to your schedule is really important still. So even if I have like these non-negotiables and I'm going to state, and like my first week I'm going to do this, my second week I'm going to do this, my third, my fourth, etc., for that month, I think holding yourself accountable to actually doing those things is super important. I think a lot of times we might say we do these things, or we might like have it in our schedule, but we skip over it because something comes up or we get tired or we want to do something more fun. And at the end of the day, it's like as much as we're coaching our staff beneath us or we're coaching our clients, I think it's important that we have to hold ourselves to that same standard. So I think finding somebody to hold you accountable to that is massive. I think that's one thing that's made a huge difference for me moving into the management position this year, is having you in proximity and you knowing what my schedule is and what I'm doing and checking with me and making sure I'm doing all these things right. I mean, if we truly believe in our career as trainers, we believe that when we're there, our clients get the best product and we know that they're going to be better with us. We're individuals too, right? And so I think having somebody to hold you accountable to what you state is massive. So I think if you're like on an island somewhere and you're managing a small team, it's going to be very, very hard for you. Luckily for the people in our company, if they take advantage of it, you can reach out to almost anybody on our elevated staff, you'd say. So our directors, other FMs, etc., and they're going to go ahead and help you and hold you accountable to that. But I think sometimes people will put themselves on an island where they're like, oh, I'm going to just do it by myself because of like spite or whatever. I really don't know. Right? I hate asking for help as much as the next guy, but I also realize that I'm better at everything I do when I have a coach. So making sure you have somebody that you're talking to on a consistent basis on what you're doing with the team and checking in is huge.
we're just as responsible for the outcome whether we ask for help or not. So I'd rather get the help and make it more likely to be successful. I feel like sometimes people convince themselves that if I'm not sure 100% of what I'm doing, then and I haven't had enough help, then I'm not responsible, which we know isn't true.
Yeah, they blame it on the lack of help.
Right.
How much did you ask for help?
Right, and we're not like here to talk about blame, but if we're looking again at best practice to position yourselves to win this year, we all have goals of success. We all have priorities that we know are going to support our goals. We prove our priorities with our schedule. So you brought up a great point. It's how making sure that we reflect back on and audit and maybe even bring in a second set of eyes. Did my activities and did the stimulus that I initiated on my club this week actually move the needle towards my goals, or did it not? And what do I need to adjust? I say that quote often, but confused minds do nothing. Most of the time, we don't know what we don't know, so we don't know the things that aren't moving us towards our goals. Sometimes it's as easy as bringing in a second set of eyes to assess that and put us back on track and have us focus primarily just on the basics. Right? We've mentioned a few activities that leaders need to do to move the needle. Unfortunately, 90% of the things that most leaders get caught doing aren't those three things, right? Lead gen, lead conversion, lifetime value, right? Those things are the only things that really matter. And most of the other stuff is just minutia stuff that we need to cut out.
I think mentorship's huge, and you're seeing that grow across every business on the planet right now. Alex Ramosi had a huge mentor. Mm-hmm. I've had a huge mentor. Imagine you had one. I know you did, how you've talked about it. And I mean, I have tons of clients who own businesses, and they all had somebody who taught them all these things and held them accountable to these things. So I think definitely finding that person you can lean up against is going to be a massive, successful endeavor to chase. So find somebody if you don't have someone.
Our leaders that I'm not in a club in, but our leaders that grew the most this year, as far as like just total dollar amount and growth, including our top earners, I spoke to no less, and I'm not in their club. I'm not speaking to them face to face. Reached out to me no less than 5 times a day. Our clubs that didn't grow, I didn't hear from that often. I had to go chase daily.
And that's, you'll see it with your clients. You'll see the same thing. My clients who reach out to me constantly, and it's not like me saying that I'm the best thing in the world and that's what I need. I think it's just the matter of having somebody. I don't necessarily know that it needs to be like an amazing talent, but having somebody who's actually going to hold you accountable to what you say is, I mean, it's huge. I think in every endeavor. So
awesome. Well, I hope this was valuable to you. I hope it was fruitful. Hopefully you're able to take away some of these different scheduling tactics and priorities and how you can plug them into your day. But I'd strongly encourage you, if you haven't yet, take your goals for 2024, the things that you're looking to accomplish, what priorities stack up with those, and then literally map out your week hour by hour. What is it going to look like in advance? Oftentimes at the end of the week, we hear from leaders in recap of their week, all the results that they're unhappy with. The problem is that they didn't have any targets and anything to go chase at the beginning of the week either. So making sure that we live life by design and we structure in advance as opposed to by default and on our heels on the back end. So with that, look forward to seeing you guys next time.